Hey everyone, and welcome to Screams After Midnight. I am Peter. This is Firefly, and that over there is
Oh,
Tim. And we talk about horror movies on this show. And on this episode, we're going to talk about a new movie that's in the theaters right now. This is one where we weren't even sure before we saw it. Is this a Screams movie? Is this a horror film, or is this something that we do on 121 where we don't do horror movies? I know that Matt's glad that we picked this because Matt didn't want to see it. But this is going to be about Mother, which is I should say Mother because it's an exclamation point at the end.
yeah.
This is Darren Aronofsky's new film, which is exciting because I like him a lot, and especially since his last film was kind of a weird misfire for me and for most
Is it
people.
Noah?
Yeah, Noah. Where
I didn't end up seeing it, but
honestly, I was actually surprised with how much I liked the first chunk of that movie. Because for the first chunk of it, it's like a post-apocalyptic world with rock monsters, and that part of it I digged a lot. And then it got into the actual Noah's Ark stuff, and it got boring and weird, and I wasn't into it. So that kind of sucked. But cause especially since I like that director a lot, but I kind of knew as soon as they announced Noah, I was like, yeah, this doesn't seem like my thing.
yeah.
You know. And my cat's knocking the computer monitor around. So yeah, so we're going to talk about Mother. We'll start spoiler free, as we typically do, especially for a new film. And he's even knocked the camera down, the little bugger. Look at that. All right. So yeah, so what is Mother? Again, I need to I need to avoid spoilers. But at least on the surface, because this is a film with a lot of layers that unravel as you watch it, but at least on the surface as we start, we have a husband and wife played by Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem, and he is a sort of poet character who's a successful poet, and she's like doing up the house, and then this stranger played by Ed Harris shows up, and Javier Bardem sort of welcomes into the house because he's a fan, and offers for him to stay because the nearest hotel is quite far away. And then his wife shows up the next day, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, and she ends up sticking around, and they're kind of imposing, and there's kind of a weird tone thing going on, and things that like, and all of it's from Jennifer Lawrence's perspective, and you can kind of feel like she's feeling like people are intruding, and she feels kind of like her privacy's being invaded, and it's all from her perspective, and they're sort of like almost, you can almost feel the walls closing in on her, and like the sort of the suffocation that's happening to her throughout the movie. And that is as much as I kind of want to say without spoilers, because it goes places.
Yeah.
It goes
It's
places.
really hard to get too much into the plot without giving stuff away.
So of course this spoiler free section might be a bit shorter than usual because we can't talk about any plot until we get to, but I can ask Tim the question, and I already know the answer, but I have to go through the motions for the show because you need to get the answer at home or in your car or in the toilet, wherever you're listening to this or watching this.
Ooh.
Just think, Tim, someone's sitting in the toilet seat right now watching this. They've got their phone and they're just watching us in the toilet seat. And in between us speaking, there's a plop.
I don't know. I feel like if I lived by myself, I'd probably have some type of like, I don't know, TV or computer monitor set up in the bathroom. But
that's the dream, folks. That's the dream.
Yeah.
So Tim, did you like Mother?
I saw this about 2 or 3 days ago, and I literally have not stopped thinking about it since I saw it.
So you loved it then? That's a good sign. That means you loved it.
Well,
Excellent.
So I think ultimately what I've come to is I think it's super interesting. There are things that are very impressive about it, but just because something is interesting or has a good idea, I'm kind of realizing it can still lead to a miserable film experience, and I think that's my takeaway here. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to think about with it, and there was stuff that was well done, but ultimately I hated the my experience of watching the movie.
Interesting. That was a very layered opinion.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot more going on there than just I hated this or I loved this. It was mine's is even more complex, I think.
Okay.
Right? I think I liked it more than you did, because I wouldn't say I hated my experience. In fact, I think for the first 2/3 of it, I loved my experience. I thought actually that some of the scenes in this were some of the best tension that I'd had all year. Like, just there was just simple scenes, or is someone in the house kind of moments where, oh man, this is effective. He knows how to build the tension. He knows how to draw it out, kind of thing.
I would say this is maybe the most I've ever felt like I was experiencing a nightmare. Like this felt very much like a nightmare to me.
It does, yeah. Especially for me, right? I mean, not just me, but people like me who, the idea of like lots of people in your house at once and try to control them, and the idea you can't get rid of them and they keep coming up, keep showing up and keep showing up. It's like, no, this is horrible.
And it's like that kind of dreamlike state where like no matter what you do, stuff is not getting fixed. Like people aren't listening to you. It kind of feels like, like there's nothing you can do to change what's happening.
Because she keeps trying. She keeps like asking them to not do things, and they keep doing them, or she asks them to do this or that, and you really feel helpless, which for a lot of the film works very well. I think there's a turning point though, where once we get to the third act, and the third act is very crazy, and we cannot even mention a word of it in the spoiler-free section because it goes down a path. Like, there's a point where I sort of like, okay, I don't really feel there's even a chance of any kind of success, and because of that, you've almost kind of lost me a little bit because there's like no, there's no like.
There's so much tension, and there's almost like no release at any point. Like you keep waiting for a kind of cathartic moment, like where it's gonna, like where something's gonna let up, and I mean, maybe even that might be a little spoilery, but I'm trying to be as like vague as possible.
Yeah. Well, see, here's what I would say about it. I think you don't necessarily have to let up so much, especially in like a sort of movie that's like a horror movie where it is kind of this nightmare. But I think there's a point where it starts to become clear that this isn't necessarily just reality, and in a traditional sense. Like, there's maybe not the same rules that we're used to. And once it was established there was no rules, about halfway to 2/3 in, I kind of like, okay, well now I'm feeling like anything could happen, and like there's almost like it could just be random now, and because I feel like it can just be random, I don't have this feeling of like attachment in the same way that I did before. Whereas the first, half to 2/3, I was really into it. That's not to say that I hate the last chunk of the movie. I actually think there's a lot of impressive things in there, and I think when you actually, and we'll talk about what it kind of means and what's going on in the spoilers, but I think I appreciate what it's doing, but I do have to admit the last act of the movie left me feeling a little bit detached. Like, for the first 2/3, I was with Jennifer Lawrence. I was in her head. In fact, the camera work I think is very, like, the entire movie is almost like either over her shoulder or it's like tight in her face. Like, everything is her perspective, and it's all mostly handheld, and it feels almost disorienting as she's walking around the house and the camera's following her, and you feel like, every time she turns the corner and sees something she doesn't like, you see it with her the same way going round the corner. It gives you that feeling, so you constantly feel like you're with her in this journey. But there's a point where once the rules no longer matter, I became detached because I'm like, I don't really feel like this is a winnable fight anymore.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. I don't know if it does.
I think I get where you're coming from.
Yeah. So it's kind of like in a lot of horror movies I talk about how I need rules when there's supernatural stuff. And it's not a supernatural movie per se, I'm not saying that, but I need rules to, like, so that I know what the challenge is, what the stakes are, and what the possibility of the success is. And once it starts going a bit wackier in the last act, I lose all, my footing goes away, and I'm like, okay, I'm just kind of floating in a void now, and anything could happen. And because of that, I felt like I was, I suddenly became very aware I was watching a movie, and I was just like picking apart things as I was watching them, trying to figure out what things meant.
Let me ask you a few quick questions again.
Fire away.
Might be a little tough being spoiler free, but going into it, did you have any idea of what the plot was other than, the maybe seeing the trailer or the poster or anything? Did you have any did you know anything about like the themes or anything that it was going to be talking about?
Not the themes. I saw the trailer, and all I remember from the trailer was couple show up kind of uninvited, and won't leave, and it's paranoid. It looked, honestly, people kept referencing it or comparing it to Rosemary's Baby. The trailer kind of felt like that, so I think I was coming into it, especially it's called Mother, so I was expecting a pregnancy at some point. So I was kind of coming into it expecting maybe, like, admittedly, it would probably be a little bit weird if he did just do the same thing where they all turn out to be part of a cult and they're all there for the kid kind of thing. But you know, I was thinking, okay, they're all in something, including the husband. I thought he was shifty from the get go.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I thought he was in things. So
now, my second question would be, I think there's a very clear, thing that the movie is trying to do. I don't know, maybe that, like you'd say, maybe what it represents or whatever. Is that something that did you realize that while watching the movie, or was it something that, like, did you come to it like after watching the movie and then sitting and thinking about it and then kind of go like, oh, okay, this was supposed to be that and that was this? Or did you, I guess what I'm saying is, like, did you have any revelations watching the movie, or did they kind of come after when you kind of thought about everything?
bit of both. There was parts of it I got as I was watching it, and then there was other parts where it was thinking about it and seeing what other people were saying afterwards, where I went, okay, that just all clicks into place suddenly, like, kind of idea.
Yeah, so, because I had like one idea, which I think you could see a little bit of it, but it wasn't until after I saw this with Melissa, and then once we were talking about it afterwards, she was making some big obvious points that I was like, oh, Jesus, like, how did I not see that? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then a lot of stuff kind of clicked in place. But even like, I would say that I understand like maybe 80% of the movie, because even once things clicked in place and I started going like, oh, okay, yeah, this is this and that is that, I feel like there's still stuff where like I'm like, I don't know if I get that though. And I don't know if you're supposed to get everything necessarily. But
here's what I'll say, right? So some people have come out and said, oh, if you have to explain the movie afterwards, it's failed. And I'm like, no, that's not. Like, if you feel compelled to go seeking out opinions to better understand the film because you're still thinking about it and you need to know more about it, it's succeeded in some way. The fact that Tim is still thinking about it, the fact that I'm still thinking about it, it did something right. That's why I love directors like David Lynch. He does that, in a more satisfying way for me than this did. But this, I appreciate this a lot. I think there's good filmmaking involved. I do think the last act left me feeling a little bit cold, just because purely it wasn't satisfying, and not in the sense that, oh, it's not necessarily the ending I wanted. Just it didn't leave me feeling fulfilled. And any type of ending can leave me fulfilled. Like the end of Mulholland Drive is pretty dark and depressing, and I'm quite happy with that because it works for the story. But I just, I'll talk about more in spoilers. But where it went, I got detached through all that sequence of the movie. And while I understand what it was doing at the end, it's like, okay, I can appreciate that, but ultimately, it still left me feeling kind of cold at the end, which is a shame because it means that I didn't like Noah. This was much better, but still left me feeling a bit detached. And from his previous movies, because the one before that was Black Swan, and while I liked that, I thought that was weaker than the ones before that, which is a shame because I love The Fountain and I really like Requiem for a Dream, and even Pie is quite good. So and The Wrestler is really good.
Oh yeah, I like those quite a bit. I actually like Black Swan a lot, but Aronofsky is kind of weird. Where I haven't seen Noah, but I think I've seen everything else, and I would say that I really enjoy every one of his movies. But there are also movies that once I watch them, I never want to watch again. Like like Requiem for a Dream and stuff. Great movie. I don't think I'd ever be in the mood to, want to, hey, let me, Saturday afternoon, let me pop this in and, check it out.
No, I mean, I would watch that again. Like, this is what I'm saying is that I love his first, 4 movies, right? To varying degrees. The Fountain's my favourite. I love The Wrestler, love Requiem, and Pie's a really fun little, really low budget, black and white sort of movie. And it's a real shame that there's this line in his career now. Like, it's one thing if he has a bit of a miss that I don't love as much. And a lot of people love Black Swan, so Black Swan is not necessarily a misfire in a general sense. I just don't like it as much as his previous stuff. But I feel really sad now that there's a line in his career that I can draw and say, before this line, good. After this line, I don't love that much. Or I don't love as much as before. And it makes me like, oh man, but So I'm like, this is a director that I would still say I really love, but he's not really hit it out the park for me now in 3 movies in a row, and that hurts.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good word earlier when you said complex, because yeah, like that's why, like, I don't want to come out and be like, oh, this movie sucks, I hated it, because that's definitely not
It's not true. It's a really well made movie.
Yeah, it's super well made, and there's interesting stuff. And again, like, if I thought it sucked, I wouldn't have been thinking about it, 3 days later after I leave the theater. Like, there's still stuff I want to know. There's, like, articles and stuff I looked up and friends I've talked to about it, because it is interesting. But it's a similar feeling to like watching like a torture porn movie. I feel like, where I just like, even if it's well made, it's like I don't like this. This is making me feel like tense and frantic, and I kind of don't like it. I don't know. I mean, you could also say that's what he's going for. I mean, that's how he wanted you to feel, which in that case, could be, hey, like that's a success. Good job.
I mean, I'm all for tense and frantic. I need rules in which that tension, freneticism.
Yeah,
that's not a word.
Sure.
That's definitely not a word. But I need rules to ground all that, so that I'd like that. That's what makes it tense for me. Once it feels like you can just do anything at once with no real care. Now, don't get me wrong. Everything that happens in the last act represents something, and I'm not going to say that I claim to know what everything represents, but
there's a point where it's like, all right, that was a huge escalation.
Oh yeah,
right,
it escalates super quick, super quick. So I think we're at the point now where we're going to go into spoilers territory. Okay. But yeah, no, it's extremely well made. Like, I actually, like, there was a point in this movie where I'm like, oh man, I love this. Like, the way it's building tension here, the way the camera's sticking with Jennifer Lawrence, so we always feel like we're from her point of view. It's making us feel like she is this like panic that people are in her house and she can't get them out, and like it was really hitting these ideas. But I left feeling detached from the ending. I was just like, okay, I get what it was doing, but emotionally, from just a fulfillment level as a movie, I just kind of feel a bit cold.
Yeah.
It felt like the ending was inevitable, and there was never any hope of doing anything different. And as a result, here we are. And, so full spoilers from this point on for Mother. So, he made another religious film.
Yep.
So, Javier Bardem is God. Jennifer Lawrence is Mother Nature. Mm-hmm. Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer are Adam and Eve. Mm-hmm. Their kids
the two sons, Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, obviously there's other things. The public who come to like worship him, they're people. They're the civilization of Earth. The house itself is Earth, and that's why like she's trying to fix it up the whole movie, and it keeps getting wrecked because people wreck the house. They come in and they destroy it, and ultimately it's kind of a climate change message. I mean, it is like the people ruin it, and it ends up getting destroyed, and eventually she burns up in the fire at the end, and the cycle starts again with a new Mother Nature.
Yeah. See, now, like, I felt a little stupid for not putting everything together like right away, because at first I thought it was more of a message about I thought Javier Bardem was some like god type figure, but it was more of a message about how once you create something, kind of put out in the world, it can kind of get taken from you, and people kind of make it their own thing, which I guess you can probably like make.
Actually, during the movie, before I got to like any of the themes that we were hitting on, because I mean I didn't really fully get there until stuff started going crazy, and I kind of got the biblical imagery and whatever else. I was actually thinking that so obviously like Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer's characters are around for a while. They eventually leave, but they were going to leave, and then their sons show up, and one of the sons murders the other son, and the whole thing goes down. And then eventually, like, they come back that night for a wake, and like all these strangers come in the house, and it's like this escalation. Like it's between these two people who just want the house, and then all of a sudden it's like dozens and dozens of people, and she's going around, and the idea that they're doing things she doesn't want, they're sitting in the sink she doesn't want that to be sat on. There's all these other things. They're making a mess. I almost, because obviously one of the things that's brought up earlier on is like it seems unclear which one of them wants children. Like they both say they want them, but one of them maybe doesn't, and it's hard to tell which. And I almost thought all of this was representing her fear of children, because children, like the whole idea that once you have kids, they kind of rule the house, they kind of wreck things. Now, obviously, I was completely wrong. That's not what was going on. But that's how I was reading it up until a point until other things became more clear. And that's where my head was going for a certain amount of the movie.
But I think as soon as you like, and I'm not the biggest religious person, so I'm not like super familiar with all these stories. Like obviously, like Jesus, Cain and Abel and stuff's pretty Adam and Eve is all well known stuff. But then it wasn't until tying into it with Melissa afterwards, and then I think she mentioned like like that guy was Adam, and then it's like everything kind of unlocked. I was like, oh, okay. And then,
I think the moment where it really clicks is that Javier Bardem's, he's like a study where he works, and he doesn't let anyone else in there unless he's with them. And I think it clicked that was like an allegory for Eden when when he's not there. Like Ed Harris is in with him earlier on in the movie, and everything goes fine, and he's showing him this precious crystal, this stone, which, as we find out later in the movie, is actually the heart of the previous Mother Nature. But he sees it and it's
like
fine.
Fascinated with it.
Yeah, but then when he goes in with his wife later on, the Eve of the story, because Eve is of course the one who takes the apple. She picks it up and it gets smashed. It ruins Eden, and that's when he locks them out. He locks everyone out, and now it's off limits. Like Eden's now forbidden for humanity. Like it's like okay, right, now we're really hitting the the themes of what's going on here. So the movie is ultimately that people keep coming in. She's trying to fix Earth. She's trying to build it up, and they come in and do their own thing to it. Other characters are painting it themselves for some reason. They're destroying the sink, as we said. The water starts spurting out. All this stuff.
And it's like you said, it's going back to the point where these more and more people are coming in, and they're basically destroying, like humans destroying the planet, and like ruining stuff, and fixing it and making it their own, and and then, like you said, Jennifer Lawrence, is Mother Nature just going like, no, stop, like what are you doing? And people just not like listening.
I mean, eventually they have sex and she gets pregnant, and we jump ahead, and 9 months basically till she's just due, and that's when like his new, because after the experience with Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and all that stuff, he writes his new poem, and it's so good that he's got like this new fan base, and like that's when it starts to get surreal. Actually, the moment it gets surreal is when you realize like it looks out at him signing autographs, because there's some people outside, because that feels kind of weird and dreamlike and kind of sudden. But then when she looks out again, you can see there's like big spotlights looking at him, and there's like this field of people, and it's like, okay, right, we're not playing in reality anymore. I mean, it never really was, but now it feels like, we can just do anything now. And of course, this is like minutes before she starts going through the house, and as she goes through the house, like part of it turns into a war zone, part of it turns into something else, and
I feel like the first half, like kind of, or probably not even half, but like the first stuff with Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer, like that felt like it was happening in real time. But then once this all starts, it feels like this crazy sped up version of time, where it's like he instantly finishes the book, and it's like people love it. There's no like sense of like, oh, like people aren't gonna steadily find it or anything.
And of course the poem represents the Bible, I think, and that's a clear thing to go with. They all come to get his teachings, because so
when I was first watching it and not really making all like the connections and stuff, I was kind of like, like, why are people freaking out about a poem? Who cares about poetry?
Fair point. So all this starts going down, and that's when like she starts going through the house, and Kristen Wiig shows up. I like Kristen Wiig, so I was happy to see her. But
I thought she did a good job.
Yeah, it's a small role, but she did good for what she had, and so she starts going through the house, and like things keep changing and weirder, and like there's this cult-like mentality, and it's basically kind of the history of the like people since Jesus basically.
Yeah.
Because obviously she has the baby, and she doesn't want to give it up, but eventually she falls asleep, and Javier Bardem takes it outside and gives it to the people. And I was not expecting to see a newborn baby's neck be snapped.
No.
Because it was funny, like, there was like a warning before the movie, so, oh, this is a hard R, like, brace yourself. And I'm like, nothing so far has been that hard, really. Like, it's been tense and maybe the themes are adult, but nothing's been that hard. And then it got to this baby neck snap, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's why it's an R rating. That's
Yeah.
no chance of it getting anything else. And then the scene after that when she tries
the baby.
Well, they eat the baby, but she tries to stop them. And they all start punching her and kicking her, and it feels super uncomfortable. It's like a lynch
That was
mob.
tough. Yeah.
Yeah, the way it's filmed is super like, and this is good filmmaking in the sense that it's really making you feel this violence in a really sort of visceral way.
It's really like just focused right on her. Like I feel like a lot of times
The whole movie
people
is.
would. Yeah, but I'm just like in this scene in particular though, with something that's so violent. Normally, you'd probably see people like cut away or do like close-ups on like the fists or legs or stuff coming through. But yeah, it's just really tight and focused on her, and just seeing all that violence up close is really unsettling.
Yeah, because like I say, it sticks with the theme of the movie or the style of the movie, where the whole thing is constantly. Because there's times when I'm almost like, man, it's almost surreal how little there is of like wide shots in this movie. It's all like this, or it's behind her shoulder, looking over at what she's looking at. It's like so much of the movie's like that. And then it gets to this bit at the end, so yeah, it stays on her, and it's like you just see the legs and punches come in, kind of thing, into frame. But like I say, by the time the house is like actively transforming as she goes through certain doors, and it's like a different type of world. That part of the house is now a war zone. There's a soldier trying to save her, and everything else, like all that stuff. And I think that soldier who tried to save her, like the one who noticed her, is kind of like representing like the environmentalists who, like, some people will try occasionally, but they'll fail ultimately because everyone else just doesn't care or is against them.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm reading too much into that. I don't know, but.
It's hard to say because I think there's, like the whole thing of it basically being, allegories for or the Bible and whatnot. I think that's very obvious. But then once like the closer you get with certain stuff, I feel like that's when you come into like, okay, so this is obviously Jesus and blah 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 and stuff. But then there's certain stuff where it's like, okay, but then who does this represent? And like what does this mean? I feel like there's little stuff that can kind of question or
I think a lot of them do represent something. I think it's just maybe if you're more into the Bible, you would have a better idea of how some people.
Sure.
But then some of them might not even be biblical. Like some of them might just represent parts of society, which is what I think. Which I think is what it is. Like that's why I'm saying this guy represents environmentalists. Like he represents that.
Did you think? I kind of thought like Kristen Wiig maybe might represent like religion, like in terms of like
organized
the people. Yeah.
Yeah, like organized religion. Yeah, I get you.
Okay. Yeah, that was one of the big ones I was wondering. Like, I wonder if that's supposed to be that.
Yeah, arguably even like just the idea of maybe not the Pope himself specifically, but the idea of the Pope and like the Vatican and them running the whole thing and almost like they're God's publicist, because that's what she is here.
Pretty much, yeah.
Literally, she's the publicist for him.
And I feel like, and then later you get that scene when it is the war zone and she's kind of going up and down and just shooting people in the head. And I feel like, that's kind of like the violence that religion can bring out.
Yeah, exactly. In the name of God, all these atrocities are committed. Yeah. And again, going back to the baby being Jesus, after everyone else eats them, Javier Bardem comes down and tells her we have to forgive them. Forgive the people. And yeah, so it's all there. But once it goes apeshit, like I say, it feels like there's no rules. It feels like the conclusion is like, there's no way of changing it. We know where this is going. Once it goes down this path, I feel like there's no chance of victory per se, and that's not always a bad thing necessarily. But here, I just felt I was so. The first half of the movie really makes you feel like Jennifer Lawrence's character, who by the way doesn't have a name. Like they're all like they're credited as mother and him, and then man and woman and so on. That's what they're credited as. And I feel like the first half of the movie makes her feel like a person. It makes you feel like you're inside her head. that once it starts to get all super allegory in the second half, that it loses that personal connection for me, and I stop looking at her as a person and more of just, oh, she just represents this, and therefore I don't care in the same way that I did before.
Yeah.
Now, I want to go back to the first half, though. I want to talk about some of the things that I really liked in terms of the filmmaking, in terms of making me feel anxious watching it. Like, you know, like, the whole idea that she'll tell someone, like, not to smoke, and then she'll see the ashtray later, and it's like, oh, and you get really infuriated, like, oh, if someone did that in my house after I told them not to, I'd be pissed, or,
Yeah.
you know, and they keep doing things, like, it keeps happening, like, the wife will, like, you know, drop the frying pan, and it goes all everywhere, and it starts a fire, and then something else happens, and then the wife brings up these, you know, Michelle Pfeiffer's character, she brings up these weird, like, oh, maybe he wants to leave you because it's not exciting anymore. She starts asking all these personal questions, and it feels like it keeps snowballing, and you're going around the house, and she keeps finding more things that people are doing that they shouldn't be in her house, and you feel that anxiety as you're going with her, and it does keep building. You feel powerless, and that's where it really does feel like a nightmare. Even before it gets insane later on, it legitimately feels like a nightmare. The whole time.
Because I feel like I've never had like this exact kind of nightmare where, you know, where it's like, oh, people in the house that won't leave and stuff. But I feel like that's a common thing in nightmares where you feel like no one's listening to you, even though like she's talking to them and she'll say like, don't do this. And they're like, yeah, okay. And then 2 seconds later they're doing it. And it just makes you feel like you're powerless and that like no one can't hear you. And there's like just that weird disconnect between like what you know should happen but it's not happening, and you know it does a phenomenal job to putting you in that space. Like I really can't think of many other movies that I feel like can so accurately portray what that feeling is like. I mean, maybe like David Lynch would probably be the closest. Like some of his stuff do have that kind of same dreamlike quality, but I don't know if necessarily like in this kind of way though.
Yeah, and when I'm talking about tension in the movie, the big thing that comes for me is it's when the brother's killed and we don't know where the other one is. By the way, they're played by actual brothers. By the way, they're both the Gleeson kids. You know, Domhnall Gleeson and Brian Gleeson is the other one. I don't really know him as well, but
I didn't really recognize either one of them, but you know, I looked it up afterwards and noticed like, oh, hey, they have the same name.
Well, Domhnall's quite well known now because he was in Ex Machina, he was in Star Wars.
Oh, okay.
He was in.
Oh,
he was in something else recently as well. He was in The Revenant. He's been popping up quite a bit throughout. So it's after. So it's when they've left to go to the hospital and everyone's left her alone in the house, and she finds that there's a door open, and there's the next like 5 minutes of her looking around the house were edge of your seat tension. It was so good.
Yeah.
Like it was so well established, and then the way he's just there at one point was like top tier horror filmmaking, because this is a weird horror movie, and I would still class it as a horror movie because of the sense of dread the entire time, and because of that feeling like it's a nightmare. Like I think it does fit into the horror genre, but that was when it was at its peak for me. Was just the pure filmmaking giving me the feeling. Once it got all messagey is when it kind of started to lose me a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, again, it comes down to, you know, I think that's very interesting, but ultimately, you know, I might have enjoyed a more kind of straightforward movie. Like, you know, if it was just Aronofsky, like, doing a, you know, straight up kind of, you know, maybe like Hitchcock-esque, like, thriller or something, I think that could have been pretty cool.
I'd love that as well. I'm not going to say that I wish this was that, because that's not what I wanted to make, and that's fine. And I didn't hate the last act. I want to make that clear. I didn't like get angry. I didn't get annoyed. I didn't like feel like, oh man, this is shit now. I never felt like that. It just kind of turned into a different movie for me, and as a result, like I think it's making all its points well enough. It's just, you know, it's all this allegory stuff, and that's great. But like I say, I felt detached, and I was just kind of out of it. It was like I stepped out of the movie and I was watching from a distance at past a certain point, and I was super engrossed before that. So I would say I liked this. I'd even say I liked it a lot, but I don't know if I ever want to watch it again. which I know you said that about all these movies, but I would disagree. I would watch The Fountain again. I would watch Requiem for a Dream again. I would watch The Wrestler again. In fact, I've seen some of those multiple times already.
I think like Wrestler I could watch again, but like Requiem is like far too depressing for me. I don't think I would ever really want to watch it again. Same thing with like Black Swan. Like, and again, really like those movies. I think they're terrific, but it's also one of those things where they're so heavy. I can't really imagine like when I rewatching something. Usually, it's gonna be something a little lighter. Like if it's I got some time to kill. I'm gonna throw on like Evil Dead or something as opposed to, hey, let's really get into like this 2 hour depressing bleak kind of movie.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Sometimes I do want to rewatch stuff like that because I appreciate it getting the emotion out of me, like making me feel like it doesn't matter what the feeling is. If the movie makes me feel something, it's done something right. Nothing worse than a movie that just makes me bored and sitting there same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
I wonder if like maybe I would have liked it more if it seemed to play up maybe more of like a nature. I didn't really think of like climate change, but that's like a good point you brought up. But maybe if they played that stuff up a little bit more than the religious angle, because I don't know, I feel like like retelling stuff as metaphors for like the Bible is kind of like something that's been done a million times. Like it might have been more interesting maybe to do more of the nature angle.
I think for me it just like I think for me it feels really disconnected in the middle, and I've said that word disconnect a lot, but just in terms of like I feel like where the movie goes in the second half, if it had made it, if there'd been more sort of surreal things throughout the first chunk, I might have not felt as adverse to it when it switched. Now, don't get me wrong, I actually pretty quickly kind of felt like something's not quite right here. I don't know if we're seeing things exactly as they are, or is this actually reality? Like, it felt slightly off. But once it started being like, I go into a different room and all of a sudden it's completely changed and it's a different, time period almost. It's like, okay, I'm kind of like,
It's definitely a big change. And then I don't know, there's some stuff too that like I'm still not sure. And again, maybe it's because I'm not super up to date with the Bible and stuff. But there's a lot of stuff like that yellow like drink she keeps taking more towards the beginning, I guess.
Yeah, I have no idea what that was.
Yeah.
No idea.
There's like little stuff like that throughout that, and also like I mean the whole thing with the her crystallized heart or whatever. I don't know if that's supposed to be a bigger reference to something. Like I guess if it's if his office is Eden, I guess that would be the apple.
It is the apple, yeah. In the story, it's the apple. But the reveal, the reveal at the end that it's actually the old Mother Nature's heart. Like, I mean, I'll give it this. That puts a new spin in that story from the Bible. Like, if next time you're reading the story of Adam and Eve, like, that apple's actually the previous Mother Nature's heart.
So, like, that's an interesting idea, but I didn't know if I was missing something about that. Like, is that something to do with the biblical story that I didn't realize? And
I don't know. If I was going to argue it, I'd maybe say that it's just the idea that it's almost scientific, actually. The idea that matter always, like, it never goes away. It just becomes something else. So the idea that, once you die, you go into the ground and you become part of the ground. And like, just the idea that maybe the old Mother Nature, became the seed from which this apple tree grew. Kind of idea. I don't know.
Also, I remember, like, when I first saw the trailers, one thing that really stuck out was just being like, man, like, we're really supposed to believe that these are a couple. Like, Javier Bardem is so much older than Jennifer Lawrence, but I guess it kind of makes sense if it's like, well, I'm sure God's probably been around a lot longer than the Earth. Like, he, created the Earth. I guess it would be younger.
It makes sense. And does it bring it up in the movie? Michelle Pfeiffer's character mentions it, I think, or someone mentions it. Someone mentions that he thought.
Yeah,
someone thought it was his daughter.
Someone. I think it is Michelle Pfeiffer. Yeah, mentioned something about him being older.
Yeah. Yeah. So no, it evokes feelings. It does that very well. The filmmaking's fantastic. Um, it kind of lost me in the last act because it just didn't feel like it fit in the movie the same way that uh it felt like the movie changed quite a bit, and I don't know if I was super into what it changed into. And maybe part of this is that I'm an atheist, even though I do appreciate the message of climate change, because
Yeah.
I think that's a decent enough idea to put in there. But I just
Do you think like marketing and expectations had anything to play with it? Because I mean, I don't know how you would like market this movie, um, but I do think that's why it's getting a lot of negative reaction, is because I do think
Oh,
most people
sure.
are expecting a straight up horror movie or
I
something.
wouldn't say for me though, like, cause for me my expectation was Darren Aronofsky, and that's all. Like,
Yeah.
I try really hard not to really, like, I pay attention to trailers and stuff, but there's some stuff where I look at it and go, I think that's been mismarketed even before I've seen the movie, just because I just, based on who the director is, based on other factors,
Yeah.
just I can usually just tell that it's probably going to be something different, or this is more art house than it's leaning, because that was actually the one thing I took from the trailer was this looks art house, so I went in expecting an art house movie, and if anything, the last like third of the movie felt too big for an art house movie, and it kind of
Yeah.
bugged me a little bit, but.
I knew with Aronofsky that he's probably not going to be doing a straightforward horror movie.
Which is almost a shame because I feel like he could probably pull it off. I think the stories of his that I like are actually a bit simpler. And admittedly, the Fountain's my favorite of his, and it's not that simple. But
I mean, I've always wanted to see him do something like, remember when he was rumored to be doing like the Wolverine movie for a long time? Like, I thought that sounded like really interesting, seeing him. I don't think he'd work with every comic book character, but I think it would be really interesting to see him, tackle something like that.
yeah, I can see that. But yeah, so I'm left a little bit cold, even though I think it's very well made. I have a lot of nice things to say about it, but I think I don't really want to see it again. So, I mean, this is going to be one of the hardest movies we've ever had to rate. I'll be honest, because if I'm rating on pure skill as a filmmaker, it's going to be quite high. But if I'm rating it on like my overall impression and do I want to watch it again, it's going to be a bit lower. So I'm probably going to have to split the difference. But that's kind of where I am. So Tim, what would you rate Mother?
So I think kind of for the reasons like you just said, I'm gonna go purely straight down the middle. I'm gonna give it a 5, just which
that feels that's a bit harsh, but go on.
Well, I mean, I feel like it's a bit harsh as well because of like you said, the skill aspect. Everything is done very well, but at the end of the day, I got to take my enjoyment into a large account of it. And as well done as stuff is, as interesting as it is, again, I can't say that as I'm sitting there watching the movie that I necessarily had a good time. So, I don't want to give it a super low score. Like, I don't want to give it a 2 because it definitely deserves more than that. And at the very least, even if I didn't like stuff, it does have me thinking and discussing it. So I think there is stuff to be said about that. But I mean, honestly, though, I am still thinking about it. So this is also a very influx kind of score. I could easily see it going up or maybe even going down a little bit more the more I think about it.
Okay, I am going to go with a 7, which is to say good, but fails to be great. And that's the sad part, is that when it is good, it's great. But I can't, it's just, the last act, the ending was so unfulfilling. And not because it wasn't a happy ending, I want to make that clear, because people, you say it's someone that's unfulfilling as an ending, they assume it's because it didn't end the way you wanted it to. That's not what I really mean. What I mean is, it just wasn't a captivating conclusion to the story the first half was telling for me. I was left feeling kind of like, when he put the little stone back on the little mantle place, and the house sort of like came back to life like it did at the start. It was kind of repetition. Instead of being like, oh, this is a cycle, this is what keeps happening. Like, instead of being excited by it, I went, oh yeah, so this is the cycle, yeah. I just,
Yeah.
I kind of, I'd already gotten what it was at that point, and as soon as I realized what it was doing in the last chunk, I immediately got bored because I knew exactly, not exactly, exactly is maybe a bit too specific, but I kind of roughly knew what the outcome was going to be, and because of that, I just kind of was like, okay, let's go through the motions and get there.
Yeah.
So, the 7 out of 10,
Very.
because otherwise, good though. So, conflicting, but aye.
Yeah.
Like I say, complex.
Yeah.
This is what happens when a really good director makes a movie that goes in a place you're not really interested in.
Oh yeah.
Because Noah was kind of the same thing, but like even a bigger problem where, like, once it got to the main plot, it completely lost me because I just didn't care. And here, I didn't not care the same way that I not cared about Noah, but once I got to it, it was kind of like, oh, okay. This is...
And that's kind of like why I didn't end up going to see Dunkirk. I really like Christopher Nolan, but I have no interest in war movies, and I'm sure it's fantastic, but I had no desire to go rush out to the theater to see it.
Sadly, I mean, I saw it. I think it's very well made, but it is easily my least favorite Nolan film.
Yeah.
And some people think it's his best. And, all power to you. You love it, but for me, it's the first movie he's made where I'm like, I'm not that interested in it, and
There's certain stuff that just doesn't hook your attention, and yeah, definitely war stories are definitely one of mine. Not that they can't be good or even great. It's just it usually doesn't get me that excited.
there are ones that I love, but like I don't get excited because something's a war movie. It's like it has to be really good, kind of. Like I have to like it, not in spite of being a war movie. That sounds wrong, but like it has to go above and beyond. Like only the best of the best are the ones that I typically end up liking. Whereas horror movies, there's a lot of mediocre ones that I quite like. So
Yeah.
like that's just how it works. But okay, yeah, I guess we're done. That is Mother. So let us know what you think of the movie in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Get us on Twitter at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. If you want to support the channel, head over to patreon.com/mailedfuzztv. You can do that over there. Otherwise, that is us. So thank you once again for watching. Keep watching scary movies, and we will see you next